For as long as humans have been walking upright, we have been looking for ways to deck ourselves out, and medieval people understood all about making themselves shine. In today's episode on medieval jewelry, we will be putting a ring on it. They connect us to heaven and hell, to love and violence, to war and peace, and to each other. For thousands of years, rings have played an ever-changing role in human society. But how did medieval people make use of this seemingly simple piece of jewelry? The answer may surprise you. Let's get the most obvious use of medieval rings out of the way first, that of a love token. And here, I'm intentionally going to distinguish between love tokens and marriage tokens because in medieval Europe, as in much of the pre-modern world, marriage had absolutely nothing to do with love and everything to do with the romance of socioeconomic security and/or dynasty building. So let's first focus on what people would consider the more fun of those two institutions. Obviously love. I'm talking about love as the fun one, not dynasty building. Talk of the Middle Ages often conjures visions of knights and damsels, with the knights alternating between committing acts of extreme violence to impress their lady love, and alternately using more genteel methods of courtship, such as reciting poetry or singing a chanson, or standing at the base of a tower and having flowers thrown at them. I don't know what's going on here. Anywho, as cliche as this imagining might be, it is not entirely an inaccurate one. What we now call courtly love, which was referred to by medieval people as fin amour, or refined love, was a very real institution in Western Europe. It originated in what is now southern France and then spread to Germany and England, Italy, and even the Iberian Peninsula. In fact, the rules of courtly love were codified by an unexpected proponent of the institution, Andreas Capellanus, the chaplain of Marie de Champagne, also, as it happens, one of Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughters. If you have some time, I can highly recommend perusing his treatise on fin amour, De arte honeste amandi. Among his strictures for proper courtly courtship, he provides a list of acceptable tokens that paramours may exchange. Rings are certainly among them, but so are a number of other items worn on what I would call more proximal parts of one's body and therefore more intimate in nature. These are included, but are certainly not limited to belts, purses, combs, shoes, and stockings. By the way, Andreas Capellanus also implied that husband and wife were constitutionally incapable of romantic love, that, quote, love could exert no power between husband and wife. So perhaps we should take his strictures with a grain or three of salt, also very expensive at the time. As though to contradict Andrew's intonement, Arthurian legends are replete with tales of knights who are in love with their wives, and vice versa. For instance, in Chrétien de Troyes' rendition of Yvain, or the Knight of the Lion, Lady Lodine gives her new husband Yvain a love ring that will keep him safe from harm during his year of knightly errantry. However, when he tarries for longer than the promised year on his adventure, Lady Lodine sends a damsel to Arthur's court in Chester to fetch back the ring with a grim message for Yvain. Stay away, she commands, for you are no longer welcome here. Deprived of the ring and her affection, he proceeds to go mad and becomes a wild man in the woods. But then, eventually, he returns to himself and civilization, of course, by performing a series of deeds in his lady wife's honor. So she ultimately takes him back. But talk about setting a high bar for relationship reconciliation. It is generally fairly easy to identify ring love tokens, as medieval people were not at all shy about engraving their intentions into this petite little piece of jewelry. The archaeological record is full of rings engraved with statements of abject devotion, such as "Je désire vous servir," I long to serve you, and "Mon cœur tient," you have my heart. Speaking of romantic attachments, of course, when modern people think of rings, their minds generally turn to weddings, which the modern Westerner will nearly always conflate with romantic love. But In truth, a ring functions in even the modern wedding ceremony as a binding symbol of an oath, specifically the vows the bride and groom make in this wedding ceremony. In the West, wedding rings themselves seem to date back to ancient times, to at least ancient Rome, where they first consisted of an iron band, actually. Remember that at that time, iron was an extremely costly material to produce. But eventually, even the Romans transitioned to gold or silver as the empire grew, especially in places like Hispania and Britannia, which had rich veins of silver. It seems that the Romans may have also pioneered the custom of engagement rings in the West. Pliny the Elder notes that, quote, "An iron ring is sent by way of a present to a woman when betrothed, and that too without any stone in it. But whether wedding or engagement band, only women, not the men, seem to have worn them in this era." Interestingly, some people posit that we wear our rings on our left finger because the ancient Greeks and Romans did. They believed that there was a vein that ran straight from said digit to the heart. It does not, by the by. That is not how human anatomy works. But I've not found evidence of a continuous tradition from ancient Rome to modern Western practice, but let me know in the comments if you have. In Western Christianity, it seems to have been Pope Nicholas I, who in 860 codified rings as an official part of not just the wedding ceremony, but of the engagement process as well. In a letter to Count Boris of Bulgaria, Nicholas notes that, quote, "The betrothed man joins the bride to himself with vows through the finger marked by him with the ring of faith." He also stipulated that the ring should be made of a, quote, "worthy metal" to signify the seriousness of the proposer's intent. Now, medieval betrothal rings could have looked like this lovely filigree piece from 1400. The original ring features an emerald, which would have been imported from distant India, most likely via Constantinople. Keep in mind that jewels were literally portable wealth and could be used as currency if need be. And a rare, hard-to-obtain gem such as a vibrant emerald would have been especially valuable. But more than monetary value, gems were valued for their talismanic properties. Emeralds, in particular, for instance, were thought to cure epilepsy, remedy complaints of the eye, and help increase wealth. A real panacea. Speaking of betrothal rings, let us talk about diamonds briefly. Thanks to the De Beers ad campaigns of the 1940s, modern Westerners obsess about drab diamonds as the stone of choice for an engagement ring. In fact, diamonds were rarely used in jewelry at all in the Middle Ages, primarily because they are extremely hard to cut. The technology just wasn't there. When diamonds were used, they were generally utilized in their natural shape, or in a point cut, which was easy to attain with the tools they had. As far as I've been able to find, the earliest documentable diamond wedding ring dates to the 1417 will of an English widow, after which it seems to be increasingly common in the historical record. For instance, in 1478, Maximilian, future king of the Romans, gave a diamond betrothal ring to Mary of Burgundy, the most powerful and wealthy heiress of her age. The ring could have looked like this one. Although enacted for dynastic purposes, their marriage ultimately became a love match. They fell madly for one another, and when the Duchess Regnant of Burgundy died tragically only 4 years later in a riding accident, Maximilian, one of the last true medieval knights, was utterly devastated. Amusingly, and yes, this is an emotional left turn, but go with me here, there is a legend stating that Maximilian purchased the engagement ring by using gold and silver he was gifted by a town through which he passed on his way to Burgundy to secure Mary's hand. Although I could find no primary source evidence backing up this tale, to me it's completely plausible. Maximilian was so broke that Mary's stepmother, the powerful Madame la Grande, the Dowager Duchess Margaret of York, had to send him money to cover his travel expenses to reach Flanders. I mean, I wonder how that correspondence went. Most noble and puissant lady, I recommend me to you. I so yearn to lead with my lady your daughter, but I'm broke. Help a duke out? I've also found evidence of diamond rings being used in the Italies as part of the very business-like wedding protocols that modern Westerners would likely not really recognize as a wedding ceremony. For instance, a poem written about the 1475 Milanese wedding of Costanzo Sforzo to Camillo d'Aragona intones romantically, "Two wills, two hearts, two passions are bonded in one marriage by a diamond," which is an extremely maudlin sentiment in a process that was heavily focused on dynasty building on an almost corporate level. Diamond wedding rings are also documented in Venice in 1503, where one Maria di Modena is listed in an inventory as having a wedding ring with a diamond. Medieval wedding rings did not necessarily need to contain splendid stones. Fede rings, characterized by their two conjoined hands, may well have been utilized in some part of the ceremony, or perhaps they were given afterwards as a sign of marital affection. This fede imagery is not only found in rings, but also in a very interesting Flemish painting spanning the years 1468 to 1490. This panel depicts the two wives of the patron, one of whom tragically perished and was succeeded by the second. If you look about the neck of the lady in full Bolognese fashion, you will see a sort of choker that is apparently closed by a set of fede hands. Perhaps this is a visual indicator to the viewer as to who the current wife is versus the defunct one. Are you enjoying the beauty of the replica medieval rings in this video? They are made by one of the sponsors of today's episode, Armor and Castings, a Ukraine-based jewelry smith who produce a wide array of stunning and reasonably priced historical replica jewelry. They also produce metal fittings and accessories. So if you would like to obtain some of the lovely pieces you've seen in today's videos, or hell, in other of my videos probably, check out their website, armorandcastings.com, and enter the code Contessa10 for an extra 10% off of your purchase. I would also like to thank, of course, my patrons and channel members for financially supporting my work. It's you who have helped me build this beautiful community of medieval learning and creativity. Patronage and channel membership come with a host of perks, such as access to exclusive videos, full tutorials, and fun uncut footage. Now, back to your regularly scheduled Contessa. Moving on from the tear-jerking romance of dynastic entrepreneurial weddings, let us turn our attention to a more pragmatic use for rings in the Middle Ages, that being a form of identity verification. I know, exciting, right? Enter the iconic signet ring. Signet rings have been used for thousands of years across cultures to seal and authorize documents such as laws, contracts, and decrees. In the 14th century, King Edward II of England decreed that all official documents must be sealed with the king's signet ring. And signet rings could be quite magnificent. As you see here, Prince Edward of Woodstock, aka the Black Prince, had a stunning one. You can see the negative impression of Edward's face carved into the jewel, which would have allowed it to create a 3D impression in wax. You may also notice how intricately it is inscribed, which presents some fascinating details. For instance, sigillum secretum means secret seal, SGEORGIUS stands for Saint George, and there's even an entire quote from the Gospels of John and Luke, specifically Luke 4:30 and John 1:14. Members of the merchant and handworker classes likewise had signet rings, both as a sign of their membership in various guilds as well as for sealing documents. This fun replica by Armor and Castings is a reproduction of an original in the V&A, which dates to the 15th century, and probably belonged to a member of a tailor's or a weaver's guild, because women are also recorded as members of 15th century guilds. This ring may have belonged to and been worn by either a man or a woman. Ellen Langworth, a master silkwoman of London, was one such guild member. According to records kept by the Merchant Tailors Company of London, Mistress Langworth was admitted to the freedom of the Fraternity of St. John the Baptist of Tailors and Linen Armorers in the mid-1400s. Records show that her own business producing silk goods and narrow wares was extremely successful, and that she even took numerous apprentices over her rather long and prosperous lifetime. The majority of sigil rings dating from the Middle Ages were apparently destroyed when their owner died. It was a way to prevent fraud, really, so that you can't fraudulently stamp documents in their posthumous name. And by destroyed, they were no doubt recast into some other piece of jewelry. The 3 R's were exceedingly medieval. Well, 2 R's, they didn't really need to reduce. They weren't over-consuming yet. That's a post-industrial thing. Anyway, This practice of reusing so-called old gold to make new objects is attested in multiple medieval wills in 15th century England and France, from well-heeled merchants up to and including the Queen of France. One will from York in England makes the following provisions. Also, I have delivered to my said wife 20 nobles of old gold to make 20 ringes, of the which ringes I will that each one of my brethren and sisters have of the said ringes one. Also, I will that my wife's brother and her sisters, each one of them, to have a ring. Also, I will that William Oira, knight, and my lady his wife have either of them one. Also, I will that young Robert Uchtred have a ring, and if that any left, I will that William Conyers of Sockburn have a ring, for a remembrance to pray for my soda. Nota that these are more than just personal remembrances. He's hoping that they will remind the recipients to pray for his soul to no doubt shorten his time in purgatory, an experience that most medieval people probably correctly assumed was coming. Also, interesting is that this gentleman bequeaths 2 of the rings to minor gentry, a knight and his lady. This is indeed the era in which the merchant class is attaining obscene levels of wealth, placing them very often above their noble so-called betters, at least in terms of financial reach, which means that this bequest could really be a flex, giving a precious gold ring to 2 members of the technically higher ranking but likely less money gentry. Yeah, perhaps a frenemy situation? Queen Charlotte de Savoie, the Queen of France who died in 1483, also had a collection of so-called old gold in her possession upon her demise. It was included in her death inventory. This little hoard may have likewise been intended to make rings for survivors to pray to shorten her time in purgatory. It's fascinating how such a practice united in death 2 people in very disparate levels of society and even different parts of Europe. Death was, after all, the ultimate equalizer. Now, we cannot possibly discuss the ultimate luxury, jewelry, without discussing laws intended to limit the display of sumptuous luxury. Yes, I am talking about the original fashion police, the laws that they attempted generally in vain to enforce, sumptuary laws. In 1285, Philip the Handsome, King of France, passes a law that restricts burghers and the rising middle class from wearing gold and jewels, in essence attiring themselves well beyond their station. Both burghers and burgesses are prohibited from wearing gold, precious gems, or coronets of silver. This would obviously apply to rings as well. But also, is anyone else now wondering how many merchants were wandering around the streets of Paris wearing coronets of gold and silver? I am, and it's super fun. One does not generally need to make laws against non-existent activities, ergo. Similar laws were passed by Edward III in 1363, which also attempted to limit the wearing of gold to the nobility and expressly forbade, for instance, yeomen and craftsmen from wearing a variety of precious items. The statute states, they are also forbidden to wear precious stones, cloth of silver, silk, girdles, knives, buttons, rings, brooches, chains, etc. of gold or silver, and embroidered or silken clothing. Interestingly, gold and silver were forbidden to members of the lower gentry, like esquires, unless they owned land worth 200 marks a year, which elevated them to a different status and granted them permission to adorn themselves more sumptuously. Fascinatingly, though, it was the commons that requested such statutes be passed. They submitted a petition to King Edward III stating, the petition put forward by the commons with regard to the excess of apparel of the people beyond their estates, to the very great destruction and impoverishment of the land, by which cause all the wealth of the kingdom is consumed and destroyed. Which shows that the sumptuary legislation was perhaps less about distinguishing social classes and more about ruinous spending. I do not think that it is a coincidence that these statutes crop up after the Black Death. No doubt there was a surfeit of second-hand goods belonging to the deceased that had flooded the markets, not to mention the new opportunities for craftsmen and laborers to demand higher wages in light of the severe shortage of, well, people. The great city-state of Florence felt likewise about excessive consumption and ostentation. Although, in the case of Florence, the city was attempting to curb its citizens' increasing tendency to adorn themselves like aristocrats. and plunge into excessive levels of debt in order to maintain a facade of wealth and power. In 1415, the city passed sumptuary legislation limiting not only the number of rings that one could wear, but also the number of precious stones. People were limited to 3 rings total on either one or all fingers, and to have only 1 pearl or precious stone, which actually tells us that the practice of wearing multiple rings at once on various fingers, often depicted in portraits of the era, was actually not just symbolic representation by the painters, but actually an accurate description of how 15th century Florentines actually wore their rings. In fact, the statute tells me that Florentines were probably wearing more than 3 rings, and certainly more than just 1 stone. Well, what about you? How do you wear your medieval rings? Do you abide by any of the sumptuary statutes, Florentine, French, or English? Or do you flout them in the truest imitation of our medieval ancestors? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay creative and stay tuned for your moment of feline felicity.